Welcome, everybody. Pleased to be here today with the ever enigmatic and really impressive Tyson Tuttle. He's joining me here today on Visions and Voices. I'm your host, John Stewart, partner here at Armanino. Please introduce yourself to the audience.
So Tyson Tuttle, I'm coming to you from Austin, Texas, South by Southwest weekend. So it's crazy here. We've got everyone from the world is here. So hopefully you're in Austin enjoying the great weather. Tyson Tuttle, and have a new startup called in the AI space, and it's been an interesting journey. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, this is going to be great. I can't wait to hear about it. And I thank you for coming on and doing this with us. I know everybody's going to be really fascinated. So why don't we start at the beginning? Because I know you're very accomplished in what you've done as an entrepreneur and an engineer. And as a fellow engineer, it's someone to look up to and model after. So I appreciate you doing this. Let's start at the beginning. I know Silicon Labs was a great success story, and you were captaining that ship. So walk us through it. How did that start, and how was that journey for you?
Yeah, well, I was born an engineer, so studied electrical engineering, did chip design. I was at Broadcom in Southern California, worked on a lot of different projects, both. And so I studied neural nets in college, and then decided there was no
that had to be the very early days, right? I mean, that had to be the super early days.
Actually, the neural nets were invented in the 50s, and then there was kind of a resurgence in the 80s, and I thought it was really interesting math, but I decided at the end of that there was no practical application, and went into communications my whole career. So I started at Silicon Labs. I had a couple jobs as a Cirrus Logic and Broadcom, and then joined Silicon Labs in 1996. I joined in 1997. They got their VC funding in March, and then I figured, okay, you guys are serious, and I joined. I learned the difference between a founder and a founding member.
Right, there is.
Or that I was on the founding team, but not a founder. So
right.
It did very well, but not the same. So we were a startup in chips and semiconductors, late 90s, which was hot and heavy, and first product was a modem for computers. So we reinvented the way you hooked a computer to the phone line. We raised $5 million of VC, and were profitable in 7 quarters and public in 3 years. It was one of the most successful semiconductor startups.
That's fantastic. That can't be easy to do
in history, and certainly from a capital efficiency standpoint. And yeah, it's $4 billion of VC total capital used. And so got that first so that was in the personal computer space. Okay? Kind of basically you could shrink a card of stuff onto a couple chips. And then I moved to the dark side. I always liked the customers. And so I was one of those engineers who liked to talk to people. And
I was too. That's where I find myself in consulting.
That's why you're doing this.
Yeah, that's why I'm doing this. Yeah, I like talking to customers as well. I get that. Yeah.
But I also studied finance and economics and stuff like that. I never realized that I should double major or anything. I just went and took these classes. I took an economics course from Thatcher's economic minister or something like that.
Oh, really? That's cool. Okay.
But so I liked the finance side, but I also really like the strategy side. It's like, okay, I'm going to work on this. Well, I got to understand everything up to the top, and then now why are we working on this, and who's the competition, and how much is it going to take, and what's the return?
It's the engineer in us. You have to understand the world to take it apart and put it back together.
Well, right? A lot of engineers like to keep their head down, and I was a real pain in the ass. I asked a lot of questions, and then they started sending me out to the customers, and so I after about 7 years in the industry, I had done 7 or 8 projects to that point. And so I moved to the dark side, is what all the engineers say. Oh, you're going to move to the dark side. But really, I kept one foot on the engineering side, but then I was my favorite part was that bridge between kind of the customer and the engineer, kind of the product management in the middle. What are we going to build? And so that was where I always really enjoyed, figuring out the first product, getting the team together, and taking that out into the market, and then driving the revenue.
That's a skill to do too, because I don't think it's a hard thing to do, to bridge from customer to engineer and product design, right? And I think very few executives are very skilled at it.
Yeah, and I was pretty deep on the engineering side too. So it's I could have a lot of respect from the engineers. They like to follow me. They knew that if they followed me, that they'd work on some cool stuff, and they were gonna, they weren't gonna waste their time. It's one of my one of my things. It's I don't like to waste people's time. It's if I'm going to ask somebody to work their butt off to go and accomplish something great, I want that to work out. And so you've got to have credibility in that.
And that's how you capture hearts and minds, which is what leadership's really all about, right?
Yeah. And you got to inspire people too. Yeah. It's we're working on this, and this is what it's going to mean. And as I've come through my career, and I've had larger and larger responsibilities, that that mission kind of driven aspect of things is, and how to build the culture and how to get the right people on board, and the things outside of just the business success start to become
Right. It has to be more than that to inspire a group to follow you, right? We get the business fundamentals, but there has to be a bigger vision than that to really get people to lean in and out of their seats.
yeah. So let me just finish the Silicon Labs piece. So moved in, so we did kind of repeated that in mobile phones. We reinvented the way the front end of we replaced like 100 components in a phone with like a chip that
Really? That's cool.
talk to the tower. So we started to really get into like the radio frequency stuff. I was going to quit and started to a startup, which looking back on, I probably should quit, but I ended up doing it within Silicon Labs. We reinvented how radio receivers and television receivers worked. And so like it was old school technology implemented in a new way in a massive market. So our radio chip, I had a team of about 15 people, and we worked for 15 months. Actually, it was a dozen people, 15 months. And in the first 5 years, we did 640 million of revenue and 480 million of profit. And we sold ultimately several billion of these chips. So it was like, think about like a little FM radio on a chip
Right.
that went into mobile phones. Our first customer was Apple.
Really?
It was actually the fastest for like from like start to revenue that anyone had ever
On one
seen.
of the first versions of the iPhone, like in the early days.
No, in the iPod.
The
Actually, my
iPod.
best PowerPoint slide was I walk in to a meeting, and I had photoshopped like the old school iPod with the wheel on it, right?
Yeah, I remember. I had one. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had photoshopped a radio line on it, and their competitors were starting to put the radios in there with a different solution. And I was like, we could do this way better, and it could fit inside, and here's how. And they were just getting ready to shrink the iPod. And they got the board ready, and when it came back, we had the fastest turn through TSMC ever. It was 14 days. We had parts back like fully packaged in-house in 20 days. They were also drop shipped at Apple at the same time. We got them working, and we had 250K in revenue in that quarter. And so that was like completely unheard of.
That's a fast offense. Yeah,
And
that's
the
really hard to pull off.
the lead of that program was one of my first investors in Circuit.
Really?
That was 20
years, but that's how you're in the trust. They know what you're capable of.
Yeah, he saw it. That was pretty cool. And then we did the same thing in flat panel TVs. It was a can of components that was really super hard, like really hard problem. I mean, a bunch of patents. I've got like 80 patents, and tons of people on my team. Usually my name was last. It's like we got to solve this problem somehow, and so you get some really smart people thinking about that.
Right.
So some really proprietary technology that allowed us to replace that in the TV. That was the toughest technical thing. And Samsung had been our largest customer for like 20 years.
Oh, really? Okay.
And so we ramped it on the Samsung and LG. So we got 90% market share in flat panel TV. So every TV you have has that chip.
Everyone has a Silicon Lab chip in it.
Yeah, and that's been since 2009. So it's been 15 years, and we still have like 85% market share.
That's impressive.
And so that was like a super fun one. And I mean, those were kind of like more consumer type markets. But like as the company got bigger and more mature, it's like a startup is super fun because everything is growth, right? You get to start with a blank sheet of paper.
Right. Everything's up, right?
Everything's up.
Yeah,
from zero, everything is positive.
Yeah, everything's positive.
When you get to middle age, which I've reached that, is like you have to have some, you're going to have some things going down as well as some things going up. And so you've got to have a strategy, right? You've got to figure out how the company's going to grow and what you're going to be and start to get momentum. And we had gone from like highly concentrated when we went public because we just had one product to having way too many products.
Yeah, how did you address that? Because that also comes at a distraction point too. Like, how do you refocus the company?
We were selling one chip to everybody in the world, but we didn't have any. We didn't get the kind of synergy between them.
Sure.
And it was also like we do one thing and then we go work on something else and then something else and something else, and so that one starts going down. And
the next shiny object, the next shiny.
We were flat for about 10 years.
Really?
Some really good new stuff, and then the old stuff would come down, and it was a little.
Oh, right. So it was just kind of that wheel. Yeah. Okay.
And so I had done all these things, and so they put me in charge of. I was CTO. Basically, it was like, hey, we need to reinvent the company. Let's go figure this out. And we were also doing components kind of in other people's systems, and so it's like, okay, we need to move up to the system level because then we can integrate other people,
right,
other people's stuff. And we want to go after a market that's got a long runway of growth. And we also we want to control the integration path. Right? We want to pull other things in there, and we want to increase our differentiation and stickiness. In other words, you want to like have like a generation of parts, and then go into another generation, another generation. So it's like
Right. You want some kind of defensive
so
moat
in other
around
words, have a
the
growth strategy.
right, right.
And so we went. I picked the Internet of Things, which when I started talking about that, everybody's like, "What is that?"
Yeah, like what was this? Because I remember those
This
early
was
days.
2010,
Right.
and I was like, well, we do all this like wireless connectivity, but and you've got your phones and your PCs, but everything else is going to get connected up, and that's going to impart all of this value.
Right.
And so and
Door
that was
locks, lights, all the other stuff. I mean, we see it now, but at the time, that was
so
like nobody
thousands
thought
of
of it.
applications of this technology, and so the challenge is, how do you address all those applications with a common platform, and then thousands of applications yields tens of thousands of customers. How do you support them efficiently?
Right.
And so keeping things simple, and so putting together that strategy and really figuring it out. And so it was a broad business which gave you the diversity.
Right.
And then we were really good at the chips, but we needed all the software pieces. So we had to, I basically the day I took over as CEO, it was 2012, and had the first earnings call. Everybody's like, congratulations, blah blah blah. And then I was like, yeah, and we're going to stop doing XYZ, and we're going to do this.
Yeah. And
and,
that had
and,
a
and
that had
and
a
part of
shock
that
a
part
lot
of
of
that
people.
was we're gonna like stop doing this stuff. I'm
Right.
going to take all these people and move them over here, and then we're going to go spend more money and build all these things. So basically it was like risk that we'll ever be able to execute this, and probably some tailwind or some headwinds, and you're going to spend more money, and so your profits are going to get down. And the stock went down by
But that
10.
goes temporarily because sometimes you got to whack the weeds to grow, right? And that's essentially what you were looking at. Like I got to kill some stuff in order for us to kind of reborn and see another level of growth, essentially.
Yeah, that's harder to do when you're a public company and you got to
Right.
report every quarter.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure. How did you handle that pressure? Because that just feels daunting, and you got to be really steadfast, I would think,
You just
in
got
a
to believe in
conviction.
what you're doing and not let stuff get under your skin too much, which is easier said than done.
Right, I'm sure it is. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it would have been a lot easier looking back on it to like take the company private.
right. Yeah, if you could privatize it, and then you're like, okay, I got a lot more freedom now, and I'm off the public eye, and I can now reform the company, which
So
you see a lot of people do now. But yeah,
so fast forward 10 years,
sure.
pandemic hits,
Okay.
and and our IoT business was on fire. We'd done two generations. I mean, we basically were $1 billion, just the IoT piece.
What was the biggest winner there, like consumer-wise? Was it like smart home technology, or was it some other place
Thousands of applications. So the big ones were like portable medical applications, like glucose
Oh,
meters,
yeah, yeah,
energy meters. So like,
yeah,
water and gas and electric meters,
yeah.
shelf labels for retail,
Oh, right. Yeah. Little things that people don't even think about, but they're there and they're helping us
uh,
experience
parking
purchasing.
meters, and then a lot of the home automation stuff. We were the leader in Bluetooth connectivity. We had Wi-Fi,
Awesome.
Zigbee and Z-Wave, a couple of mesh networks. And so we had 100% share of that stuff. We also did like 9 acquisitions in the middle of this. So I did basically an acquisition a year of smaller companies, smaller teams and technology that helped us build that stack.
That's
And
cool.
so kind of moving from hardware into the software world, by the time we were done, we had 60% of our engineers in software instead of
Really? That's quite a transformation. Yeah, that's great.
but we got to the end and we hit the pandemic, and after I'd convinced my board that the world wasn't going to, be over.
Right, right. It's not
We
going to
have
die. We're going to
$700
move
million
on.
dollars in the bank, and I think people are going to need more chips. Leave me alone. This is really, we got a lot going on here. We had acquired a company in India in April of 2020.
Oh, really? Right during
And it's
the
like you can't
beginning.
travel there, so you're trying to
Yeah,
do
you
all this
couldn't even go visit them and incorporate them, build the culture, get the
stuff.
vision set. Yeah, yeah.
But it was, I realized in the middle that like our IoT business, think about it, as an investor, it's like we had a growth business that was just
Yeah.
going crazy. And then we had a value business. We had a profitable, that I had been kind of harvested. It was growing modestly,
Right.
but
The core was still sitting there holding things together. That's
yeah,
great.
so all those core kind of legacy products,
Yeah.
and it was from a manager, to lead the company. It's like, both from an investor standpoint, it's like, well, this is doing this and this is doing, it's kind of a bucket of parts. And then
Right.
from a culture standpoint, it was like I had two different types of employees, right? I'm like, all right, you guys don't have any more resources. You're on the diet over here. I mean, that business was running like 70 points of margin and 50 points of operating margin. So it was, $450 million and $225
Right. The definition of cash cow, right? So you
cash
just
cow,
you
great
let it do
asset.
its thing. You don't mess with it. Right.
And my board was basically telling me, fully harvest it, just move everybody over and let it. And I'm like, no, that's worth a lot of money.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah. Why would we kill that right now?
if I'm going to put my shareholder hat on, and like, that's not the right thing to do over there. And then they're like, well, just keep squeezing it. And it's like, there's no more blood in the turnip.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's nothing. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad either because it is that cash stabilizer. So yeah, let it
it's
go.
just, that's what we had essentially said. We don't want to do any more of that, but it's valuable in the hands of somebody else. And then you had this growth asset in IoT, and now, right, you're the favorite children, and doing all this. And that's why,
Right. And that does creates a rivalry in two different cultures. Yeah.
yeah. And I was like, these are my favorite children. I'm talking about them all the time.
Right.
I'm never talking about these guys, right?
Yeah.
So,
And they're like, why don't you ever talk about us, Dad?
right. So culturally, it was also a challenge, and so that and the various board members had different opinions on that. But so I took it to him. I said, we need to break the company up in half.
Okay.
And so at that point, it's about half and half. And I was like, and the IoT, this was right, like the pandemic hit and everybody thought it was the end of the world. And then it was like, oh, we can't build enough. Well, actually, at that point, it was like, the sky's the limit. This is going crazy. We got like customers coming in. And so it felt like a really good time, ran the sum of parts analysis, hired a bank. Board thought I was crazy, but they were like, all right, go think it through.
Right.
And the team was like, yeah, this makes total sense. They understood how hard it was to keep those two. They didn't have any, there were no customers in common. There was no technology in common.
Right. So that's a relatively easy split to make
That guy was a holding company for two businesses.
Right. That's essentially what you were doing. So make it make sense. Split them and let them both face the market their own
Well,
way.
and it's my belief that like when you really focus in on the thing that really matters,
Right.
It makes the culture easier. It makes the communication easier. And certainly from an investor standpoint, it's like, it's clear. Okay, that's what I'm investing in, this thing. It's like,
Right.
you're not investing in this company to diversify your portfolio. You can do that other ways, right?
Right.
You want shares in that one, go buy shares in that one too. But then in the middle of that, our stock price doubled, and we hit the supply crunch. If you remember when you couldn't buy a car.
Oh, I remember. Yeah.
Or not an appliance. Well, that was us. That was the semiconductor industry. I had 25,000 customers on allocation. None of whom I could make happy, and all of whom wanted to talk to me. Right.
Wow. Yeah. And you're like, there was no easy way out of that hole. Right.
And so here's my thesis. I've got a value asset and I've got a growth asset. And now I'm not sure that I can grow the growth asset. Right. So it's that the growth asset, I was clipped. So it's like, now my math got a little shady, right? It went from like a total no-brainer financially to a judgment call.
Right.
And I mean, in the end, we got a unanimous vote with the board, but that didn't make it easy. So we ended up marketing it and selling that for $3 billion out to Skyworks, which is a Southern California public company. And they were super happy. That team moved over. That entire process from like conception to closing that deal was all on Zoom.
Oh, right, because
right in the middle
like
of
we were flying anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was wow. like the board decisions, all the marketing. There were certain things that were easier, like the marketing was easier. Actually, you didn't have to go anywhere. It's like 2-hour call. You want to buy it?
Right. You just show it and everybody gets it. You don't have to. Yeah. The dog and pony show changes, right? Yeah.
But a lot of the strategic discussions got really hard.
Yeah.
That was it's you can do a 5-hour Zoom call and nobody listens. You got to call everybody afterwards. And I had a real distaste. And also, at that point, I'd had a really strong leader that I brought in to run that business, and he was ready to take it over. And
he was ready.
I was like, all right, I did my job. I transformed the company. Now it's like, this is this new thing. And so I announced that I stepped away. So we had like a 5-month transition. I had the best party. So
oh, really? Cool. Okay.
In December of 2021. So, the pandemic, we hadn't seen each other. And it was like right between Delta and Omicron, if you remember that. And it was like, we'd sold off a group. So I had all my old colleagues. I had former colleagues that I'd worked with. I had all my friends from town. We had 800 people at like this massive barbecue place in downtown Austin. And I mean, they had shirts, and it was, we took all the holiday party budget and put it into this thing. Actually, it was a total surprise to me. I didn't know, I wouldn't have approved it.
Oh, really? You didn't know what was happening?
It was like totally embarrassing. It was like, and I probably hugged 400 people. I hadn't seen anybody.
Yeah, because you hadn't had that interaction.
We were sitting right here for like that whole time.
That's
And
crazy.
and it was amazing because I could remember everybody's names. What's going on? It's because like when you're on Zoom, you
You
get
can see everybody's
everybody's
names.
name on there,
Yeah,
and
it does
nobody
help.
died. So that was
Yeah, you don't want to be the spreader event, right? The spreader event's not a good event to be part of.
yeah. So nobody died and hugged
That's a
everybody.
two thumbs up.
It was
Yeah.
just awesome. That was and then so it's like great transition, and then it's like all right, on the next day I'm just a citizen again,
Right.
and and I think I had worked. I hadn't taken a weekend off since I was probably in high school. I mean, in high school, I
Really?
like, I sold donuts when I was 14. I, sacked groceries, made pizzas. I worked at Radio Shack 2 years in college to put myself through.
That's cool. No one, and most people watching this don't know what Radio Shack is, but I'm with you. I know what it is.
Yeah, yeah. That's where I learned sales.
Is it
Uh,
really? Yeah, that's a good way to learn it, right?
Great
Right on the
sales.
front line.
That's actually funny. Some of the easy, simple things you learn from more than you do in, more sophisticated jobs
It's
sometimes.
true. It's
Certainly
true.
lessons. How to wash a coffee pot was a good lesson for me. So then I came out. I had 2 kids in high school, and I was pretty burned out from the pandemic, and I needed a little time. I mean, I don't golf. I don't, it's like I don't vacation that well. I get kind of bored.
Yeah.
I like work and I like people and I like learning. And so spent some time on nuclear power, spent some time on quantum computing, considered a few jobs, but it's like I don't want to go. It's like I've been a CEO at a big enough public company. It's like going and running a bigger one. It's like, is that where I want to spend the last decade of
Yeah, I
my
mean,
life?
you already kind of checked that box too, to a degree, and you sound more to me like an explorer, somebody who wants to explore and build something new. So,
Yeah, and I like the semiconductor industry has matured a lot and
right.
consolidated, and you got Nvidia's doing pretty well now. It's great now because like my mom can understand what I do. Like 5 years ago, if I had said I'm in the semiconductor industry, your eyes glaze over and you walk away, right?
Right, right. You're like,
And
okay, sure.
and I was like, but it's really cool. It's like in everything, and it's like nobody really cared about semiconductors, and now with like the Trump trade war, the
Yep.
first one had all the shortages during the pandemic. You had the all the CHIPS Act stuff. We'll see where
Yep.
that all goes. And then I don't know if everybody's read the Chip War book, but the Chip
Oh,
War is a very good book on international geopolitics and technology and Moore's law. And it's written really about the people. And I
oh,
remember I
interesting.
read that book. I
Okay.
was actually going to Morocco with my wife, and I read it cover to cover, and I didn't learn anything new, but it was like I was just filled with like, okay, that's great. So it's a really, really good read.
All right, it's going to be on the recommended list now. This is great.
Yeah, it's got to go on the recommended list.
Got to go on there. It's on.
But it's like now people understand the importance of semiconductors and all that. But like when you think about doing something new, and it kind of got down to like I don't really want to go do VC or private equity. I kind of view as like kind of looking in the past and like fixing things or optimizing things.
Right.
It's like I'm like you say, an explorer. Actually, the first in our new company I bought right when we started the company, I bought a picture of Ed White,
Oh, yeah.
who was
First.
the first American
Astronaut.
astronaut to go
Yeah.
EVA. And the
Yeah.
Russians beat us by like 3 months, but they didn't take a camera. They took a movie camera, but they didn't take a real camera. They took a Hasselblad on the Gemini.
Right.
And this was the first picture that they snapped when he stepped out the hatch. And so it's the first photograph of a human in outer space, and it's original print from Houston in 1960 something, right?
Right. That's pretty cool.
And put that up, and it's about exploring and charting the unknown and taking risk and innovation. Like without that, none of this would be possible. And so it's like kind of that inspiration,
That's
for
awesome. That's a great story. Yeah, most people don't
that's
even know Ed White.
yeah. Actually, I should. He was wearing this watch,
The Omega, right? The
the Omega Speedmaster.
Yep.
So that was
I'm well aware of it. I'm a fan of nice watches, and particularly Omega Speedies. Yeah.
yeah. I had I don't know if I had the cheap one. This is the Swatch version.
Right. Right.
But I hadn't made the connection, and then I realized that he was wearing that watch, and then I had to go out and buy the real
You have
one.
to go get it. Yeah, you have to. It's the original Ed
It's
White
like
Omega.
and we named all of our conference rooms after space programs and that sort of stuff.
Really? Oh, I see. I love that. That's fantastic. Yeah.
But it was like it's like I didn't want to do semiconductors again because you're going to go pick up the crumbs. Back to this mission, I wanted to go out and change the world. I wanted to. I can tell you about all the great chips we worked on, but like you didn't know that our engineers had done that.
Right. All that stuff's embedded inside of stuff that.
Right. And so I wanted to get closer to the end user and the customer.
Okay.
and basically not necessarily be a consumer company, but touch people directly.
Right.
And so
Makes sense.
the apps and the software and the algorithms and the cloud, all of the computing that we've built on top of semiconductors, I actually wanted to go up to the top and apply really, and now the big wave being AI. And it's not
Yeah,
just
I'm curious to get your take on that as you tell the story because everybody has one and you're closer to it than most, obviously. So yeah, let's go.
yeah.
So
I
that's
mean,
kind of
another role, like beginning of 2020, I joined the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank board. So, so monetary policy. I
right.
was the only Austin guy and the only tech guy on the
Really?
on
Yeah, I
that
guess it
board,
is more of an
and
old
I was
school thing.
arguing for like lower, lower rates and buying bonds that was just fueling inflation because we had to like increase prices and I
Right.
saw inflation all over the place early.
Yeah, and you
I was
can't
like,
buy
this
your way
is
out of that. Yeah.
we're making this problem worse because we
Right.
shifted from services to goods and they were like jam the supply chains.
Yeah, you can't buy out of it. Like we kicked that can down the road during the pandemic, but you have to eventually you have to come true to it.
We printed too much money.
Right. We
We
diluted the currency
printed about
far too much.
$4 trillion. But if you look at, so the most important thing I learned in that role was that the GDP, and that's the thing we're trying to grow.
Right.
The
That's a
number
good
of
number.
people
We need that
working,
number. Yep.
the number of people working like grows, and that goes up and down. That's birth and immigration and or deportation, whichever way you want to look at it,
Right.
times the productivity per person.
Right.
And the productivity per person has mostly been driven over the last 40 years by globalization, leveraging, international labor effectively.
Right. Economies of scale, using other
It's
nations.
not adding to the US workforce, but we added to the international workforce and we're
Correct.
reaping the profits from that. So that adds to productivity. And then technology. And so if you look at Moore's law and computing and the internet and the cloud and mobile phones and social media and IoT, all of these things improve productivity, like
Right.
massively. Like the first chip I worked on in college was 2 micron feature size, 2000 nanometer.
Wow.
And, I'm sorry, no, it was 3000 nanometer. And then today,
Okay.
the most cutting edge chips are 3 nanometer. So it's a factor of 1,000. So in the space of one transistor of what I did in the late 80s when I was in college, you could fit 1 million transistors.
That's crazy, right? The amount that,
Crazy.
yeah,
One to 1 million.
absolutely insane. Yeah,
And
absolutely
so
insane.
that has led to all these advances. And it's like the most stunning change in the history of humanity. And here we are, the next wave of AI. Like when I, studied this stuff in college, and now here we are, 30 plus years later,
Right.
and now it's become at a scale that's really useful.
Right. There's
And
enough out there
all
now
the
you
data
can.
is there, and all the tools are there, and everything is there. It's like it's just staring you in the face. Like this is going to be the biggest wave ever.
I
Like it's
think
going to
so
be
too.
bigger than
So
those other waves because it's now
I
reached
don't have the
the
fear
ability.
monger about it. I think AI is like, and this is a horrible example, and you may not agree with this, but like when Excel came out, it changed how you worked because people ever did everything on like paper before that,
That
essentially.
was really in the digitization phase.
Right. Now AI is like it's the same way of we're impacting productivity again, but in a much larger magnitude now.
Yeah, well, I mean, and all these things change the economy and change society,
Right.
right? And AI is going to change society massively.
I
Like
think so too.
it is going to change the way we work. It's going to change the way we consume information. It's not just automating things. It's like, and it's going to make some problems worse too. I mean, we got too much information.
Right.
All of a
And you
sudden
don't need all
we
of
got a
it. So much
machine
not
that can
right.
generate more information. It's like, oh man, here we go. And social media disrupted journalism. Amazon disrupted
Right.
disrupted, and so. But AI is going to generate. I think is largely going to disrupt a lot of white collar jobs.
Yes. I
Right.
believe
So it's
so.
like, you say, okay, globalization took the blue collar jobs away. Well, now we're getting ready. We got a machine that can do a lot of the white collar jobs.
Right.
And that is, at the same time, there's the same number of people and they're going to find productive work one way or another. Maybe it's less productive, but, it's not going to subtract from the workforce, but it's definitely going to change the productivity factor.
It's going to
And
change the way
people,
we work. Yeah, absolutely.
the
The way we
work
have
of the
input.
future is going to be different than the work of the past. And there's going to be winners and losers in that
Yep.
process. And, both in terms of companies and in terms of people. And this is probably of interest to your audience here, but back to that disruption, And, it's like, I think a lot of times philanthropy is an afterthought for people.
Yeah.
And, companies try to do the right thing, but they can't really, so like there's a 1% pledge for companies. It's like,
Right.
I'm going to give 1% of my profits away to the community,
Right.
which is kind of a pittance, but it's not even like a tax, but it's kind of a tax on profit. But it's like
Right.
in a good year, you might do that. In a bad year, you might not, and if you get sold, that all goes away or
Right.
whatever. And so one of the things at Silicon Labs, when we sold off our group, I wanted to take like 100 million of that 3 billion and put it into a foundation to take, and the rationale was I want to take the philanthropy and the community stuff out of the budget. Because it was always, it was the first conversation when you had a rough quarter. It was okay.
And to your point, it's never the primary driver, so then it just doesn't really get the attention it maybe needs to be effective.
That's right.
Yeah.
And a lot of organizations can, would like to count on, the support. And you got to have a mission and all that. So I think it's much better done separately from a company and a foundation. And so setting up Circuit, it was one of the first things I did. I said, we're going to give 20% of our equity.
Yeah.
I want 20% of our equity to end up in a foundation. And then it was like, I'm going to pledge that if I move that now, it's not worth anything, so I don't get anything for it. As we build equity,
you build, it goes up in value. Yeah.
Then I can take the tax deduction
We've done something similar to Armanino. I'm actually wearing the shirt today, ironically enough, because we didn't plan to talk about this, but we've set up our own foundation as well. It's outside the company. It's run by one of our former CEOs, the brother of the CEO now, Andy Armanino runs it. But it's the same thing. Partners, we contribute to it, we contribute to it. It's external, but it's our vehicle to make an impact.
Yeah. So for us, it's about AI literacy.
Yeah, I love that. Okay.
And workforce retraining, right? So the job, in other words, give people the skills that they need for the jobs of the future.
Yep.
And then the civic applications of the technology that we're like to support nonprofits and customers that should pay, but actually we need to actually pay them.
Right. Right. And that's how you're going to build.
In other words, to make AI accessible for for the community at large, and to have those benefits spread across the country. This is not just Silicon Valley and LA and Austin and Boston and New York. It's actually that help is needed in smaller cities and towns even more. And
I love that.
My goal is to build the biggest foundation in the country. And
really? Okay, I love this.
That's a shockingly small number.
Is it really?
The Gates Foundation is like 70, maybe $80 billion.
And that's the largest in the world right now, right? Yeah. That in open field.
And then you compare that to the U.S. economy is approaching 30 trillion.
Right. That's not even
close.
Yeah, I know. It's not even on the same level.
$70 billion foundation is going to give away, let's call it 2.5% a year.
Yeah, because it's going to roll off of its endowment. Yeah.
Right. So, so they're going to put out, a couple billion a year. That's less than the city of Austin, electricity department's budget. Right.
It's crazy when you put it in that relative.
And that's the biggest one. And they're trying to solve all the world's problems. So it's like, it makes you realize that, actually some of the stuff that the government does in taxes actually move the needle a lot more. And the argument that, philanthropy is going to take the place of a lot of the programs. It's not great.
Yeah. I like that because I think what we're also seeing is a lot of these larger philanthropies and foundations and private charities, like they're being run like a business. So they are more effective. And they're more conscious of their capitalization and the productivity on the return of that capital. So I think you're seeing those larger ones actually be way more effective now.
Yeah. So it's like that's not actually a crazy goal. And
that's a
all the founders and all the employees have pledged 20%. So just to run some numbers, like let's take Silicon Labs. We were a $1 billion company, $250 million of profit a year. $2.5 million of philanthropy out into the community. Yeah. And we never got there.
Okay.
We had made the pledge and you could count in kind and stuff, but we do about $1 million a year.
Okay.
And and that's on a $1 billion company. And a lot of that, it was like little tiny chunks.
Sure.
And then let's say that we had set this up this way in the beginning, that $1 billion company in this space is going to be a $10 billion market cap.
Sure.
10% of our shares when we go public or more are going to be in the foundation. So call it $1 billion foundation. That's like $25 million a year. So it's a 10x increase in the
Right. That's a massive increase from how you're impacting the community. Yeah.
yeah.
That's great.
And then you can scale it from there. But and then you get all the tax benefits when you come. So it's like half of the money that is in the foundation is actually from the government, from the tax savings. Like that's not money out of my pocket because I get that back and
Right. You don't have to pay the
tax savings.
taxes.
So that if you think that the company can be 10% more successful over time because there's lower risk and you're going to have higher growth, happier, you're going to be able to recruit better people, employees are going to be happier, customers are going to look at that as a good thing. And we've actually had several. I don't make the investors make this pledge, but
Oh, fair enough.
I've
Yeah.
had multiple investors make the foundation pledge as part of their investment.
That's pretty cool because they
Like,
just decided they
we'll
like that.
just allocate extra shares to them. These are shares that would have been given away anyway.
Right.
But I'm allocating, but they get the benefit of the tax deduction from that. So it's, you've got to position it kind of in the right way. But I think that's going to be a powerful multiplier on the success of our company. And that in the end, I mean, I think that tech people in general, when you've lived Moore's Law for 30 years,
right,
the world is a win-win. Right. This is not a zero-sum game. We're creating something out of nothing. And I don't believe that I'm giving away anything. I think I'm actually creating more success for the company than
yeah, because you have this parallel track that not only you're on your business mission with Circuit, but then you have this parallel path that is maybe taking some of those learnings, but also then helping bridge it into the community and just do good, right?
and it's like, I mean, our goal is to go drive revenue, drive profit, and like become fabulously wealthy and be hugely successful as a company and go focus on building.
Right.
But knowing that, hey, there's a foundation sitting off to the side here that's going to share in the success as we go together, and it's not a distraction in my view. I actually think it's a clarification. It's a lot better than what OpenAI and the guys there did.
That's a very different
nonprofit, and then we're not really a nonprofit.
No, they're not really. Now they want to become a C corp, and that transition is not an easy one to do, and it's not without its own pitfalls. So that'll be an
I mean, it got a lot of attention. It's like it's kind of weird that today, it's whoever has the largest megaphone is the one that just kind of gets all the attention. But
yeah, that kind of gets old too, right? Like you're like, I get it, but that doesn't mean that person's right, or it's the only way to do it. So tell us more about Circuit AI. Like, where's the vision on like where are you taking this thing? What
so it's again, building on the top of the large language. So we're building on top. Semiconductor actually, since I'm in Texas, energy is at the bottom of this, right? So energy is powering it all. You got all the component providers from NVIDIA to TSMC to Dell and others that are building the equipment. Then you've got the hyperscalers building out the data centers.
Yeah.
And others, massive money. This is
right. You need the
$500
power
billion
to do all this. Yeah.
And then now you're running stuff in the data center, and you've got the people training up models like OpenAI and Anthropic and Meta and the DeepSeek stuff. That's pretty interesting. And so that's all coming together, and there's billions and hundreds of billions of dollars going into training all this stuff.
Right.
We're building the application on the top. So applying AI into the economy and into society.
Right. The application.
That's the first thing is that we're at the application layer.
Okay.
So we're building on top of all of the large language models. And what I really realized is that AI has really two things it can do. It can read and write, and it can think in the middle.
Okay.
Right? And here we are. We got too much information in the world, and really when you start thinking about you have this blank sheet of paper and you're thinking about solving problems. The principle is that you can now AI can be on the top, right? In other words, it's an AI native, AI first approach to a problem. Like many legacy applications, they have an existing architecture, and then you add an AI button down at the bottom. Like,
right, which doesn't really do much.
You take one button on Microsoft Excel, you like crash the world economy, right? It's right. You can't really change the framework or like how. So here, like the thing about AI, because it can read and write, you can do things in a much more unstructured way. In other words, I can take information and put it into AI, and it can figure it out, and then I can ask it questions.
Sure.
And so then we also kind of have to organize. So the the name of the company is Circuit, and the organizational block is a circuit, which is a topic. So you have a topic, and you can just pull all the data and information around that topic. And then AI lets you abstract away the details And so it can read it and understand all that stuff. It goes into a knowledge graph, into a database,
Okay.
but around that topic. And then you can ask questions, you can create documents as the information changes, the documents can change. And the information can be your personal information, your contacts, your email, your, cloud drives. It can be your corporate data. We've got
whatever the topic needs,
structured
right?
systems within our organizations. It can be open, public data, websites, news sources, paid data, books, journals, news.
Sure. Yeah, it can pull all sources. Okay.
So you can pull all those sources into these topics, and that could be a person, could be a company, could be a project, could be a product, and then that's really good for personal productivity, but it's like it turbocharges collaboration.
Oh, right, because now you get the whole team on that same page.
So it's like, in other words, and if you have a lot of information in there, you don't have to, you really focus on making sure you've got the right information in the database.
Right.
And then what questions and what insights do I want to get out of it? Like, so then those are kind of the applications become just questions to AI.
Right.
And so that turbocharges collaboration. But then where things are really broken, and when you're a startup, you can have this big vision. So we're going to create a network. So we're going to leverage the network effects, and we're going to build a new type of network that's not just posts or not just messages, but is actually knowledge, which is this container of information or multiple containers. So you can share those out with your team, but you can also share them out publicly, or you can share them with other organizations. And looking through all of those different things, the thing that's broken, and you always say, who's your competitor? And it's like, my competitor's email. And
that's broken. I agree.
Well, so if you go between, probably most of your customers, they have to log into your system. Maybe they're all on the same system, but it's like between companies, everything goes to the least common denominator. Which is
it does.
A website with a search box, typically email or a voice call or text. I mean, it's like
it goes to that base level because you don't know what else to do.
Yeah, and then so like in sales, and so it's like, do you go straight to the end users? Do you back up in the supply chain a little bit? And we realize that, like, when you're a startup, you have to thread a needle. You can't boil the ocean, and you can't do everything. So you got to really focus, and you want to focus on something that can deliver revenue pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And you also want to focus on things where you have the kind of the highest value. Right.
Makes sense. Yeah, you can't focus on everything. You got to pick.
Right. So it's like, it's actually been the hardest thing for me, because it's like, I have a big picture. We want to go build this big network and do all this stuff and build out this whole platform. But it's like, you can't have that immediately. And so, you've got to show, and, you need to drive a wedge and say, okay, let's show that we can do this here, and that we have value, and that people like it and are willing to pay.
You need that roadmap step by step here, because you'll get to them, but we got to find where do I start?
Because then I can go out and raise more money, and it's kind of a land and expand.
Right. It'll build on itself at that point. Right.
Or then I've got enough revenue, and I've got profitable, and now you can do it. And then you can adjust the knob. Do I need to push that off, or do I want to crank down on it? And so the place that's really, so it's this intercompany communication, but it's also in like one to many. So it's like where a company has a set of products, and then you've got a distribution network. And so, like at Silicon Labs, we had 2,000 people. We had about 200 salespeople. We had 25,000 customers, and we served about 1,000 of those customers directly. And then we had 25 sales distributors and reps. And so every product team had to put together their information. A lot of it was under NDA, and then that had to get out to our sales force, and then it had to get out to our wholesale, all the reps and disties. The largest global distributor in semiconductors is Arrow Electronics.
Okay.
And they're a $30 billion company based in Denver. My daughter's in Denver, so that's a good trip.
All right, good shout out to her.
Yeah, exactly. And and so they've got 400 companies on their line card, right? So here you've got, like, between companies, there's 400 chip and electronic component makers.
Right.
You've got a bunch of different distributors, and you've got this big matrix between them that's email and maybe a Dropbox.
Right. That the
So
best you're going to
the
do.
biggest
Right.
company will have some like old school data feed that goes, and that so Arrow's got to take this stuff, and then all of their competitors have, and
Right.
everybody's working with the same stuff, but it's all broken. It's all
Right.
old.
And it's all over the place. And
It's not a network. You don't know if you got the latest thing. You're calling people up and saying, "Hey, what's this?"
well, heaven forbid if someone leaves, it was only on their computer or they didn't share it out. And like, yeah, like all
Well,
the,
and then it's like, a lot of the external information, like the competitive data or the news,
right.
so it's like that. It's like building a network around this. And I know all the CEOs, right? So, and we know the pain points in that, but you can replicate that in a lot of different industries.
Yeah, that's just one use case. That's one case,
And
but you can see that across many
same
industries.
functionality.
Right.
And so we're going after this one-to-many application. So
Yeah.
one of our first customers is Culligan,
Oh, the water company.
like
Yep.
the water, like the Culligan man, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The water filter, they're the largest water filter company,
Yep.
actually owned by private equity by Michael Dell. Michael Dell was in my office last week, and I was telling him what we were doing. He's like, "I think I own that company."
I think I own the
And
company. You
it
do,
turns out the
Michael.
head of his family office is on the board at Culligan, and I'm like, "Okay, this is a really small world." Their CIO lives like 2 blocks away,
Really? That's funny.
and so they've got 2 billion in sales. They got 12 product lines. They've got 1,000 franchises and distributors across the country, and
Yeah.
it's email, website, and we've been having calls and talking to them, and they're like, in other words, how do you AI enable this?
Right. Right.
Right?
Yeah. And that's an
And it's
interesting
and so
segment to go after.
the app, so that's
Right.
like the beginning of the network, right? So that's
Right.
a small network. The semiconductor industry can be a small network. So we're building out the platform in this one-to-many application. What's kind of cool is that some of the customers that are coming in are wanting to invest in the company.
That's
And
when you know you're onto something, right?
and so they're like, "Hey, yeah, we'll be your customer, but
But we want to put some money in too.
put some money in this." So I went out really early and talked to the VCs, and now I'm like, I'm not sure I need you guys right now. We've
Can be a
raised about
blessing in a lot
15
of ways.
million.
There's freedom
Yeah,
that comes
15
from that.
million from like friends and family. I have a little bit of mine in there.
Really? That's
So
impressive too. Yeah.
yeah, so we've got kind of runway into 2026 to fully flesh out the project or the product, and get through the first customer ramp.
Well, I know we're demoing it over here. I told Matt I'm gonna bring people. I want people to see it at this end too. So
You
we're
are not our target market,
I
but
didn't think so.
anybody who walks around with 2 cell phones is not going to be your fastest time to revenue.
This is very true. It's very true.
But so that's super exciting. We've got a team of 25. We're officing out of an old house here in Central Austin, and I can't give the address because I'm a bit of a risk taker sometimes. I bought my house on September 12th, 2001, and
That's an interesting day to buy.
sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. So these
Yeah.
are some of my life mottos, which
Yeah.
probably makes me a pretty good startup guy. It's
I
like,
think so. I think so. You have
can't
to have
worry
that
about
edge and
parking
risk.
ticket too much.
Yeah. Well, if you're not comfortable taking those risks, you're probably not going to be a great startup guy, right? Because the whole thing is risky. So,
Yeah,
and it's
you
got
just it's calculated risk though.
right. Yeah,
Right.
you got to be smart
It's like
about it.
you have to have this instinct of like where to go and then like when to do it. Right. In other words, you can do the great stuff, great execution, and time the market wrong. I firmly believe that like now is the time for AI to go. I mean, it's the evidence is everywhere, and it's a
Yeah,
green field of opportunity. It is. We are not competing with anybody but ourselves right now.
exactly.
It's just how fast can we get this out? How fast can we get the customers? And AI is starting to write a lot of the software. I mean, we've got like a very senior team, and the software engineers are like, I am 10 times more productive than I was 2 years ago.
See, that's fantastic.
That's the number of employees. So like if you look at Series A funding in VC,
right.
number of employees is going down in the average round.
Well, I mean, I know when I look at what we're doing in family office, Tyson, that's the impact we're having, right? We're putting in bots in family offices just as a random example, right? But as a way it's a digital worker now. That's kind of how we talk about it, right? You're working with your human workers and digital workers together, and it's changing the landscape of how you hire and what that means. And
Yeah,
it's offset. Yeah.
The new term for that stuff is agentic.
Oh, agentic AI, yes.
Yeah, so bots and RPA that's the old school way of talking about it.
That's the old school way, right? Now, it's already old school. It's only a couple of years old.
It's agentic AI because it's in old days it was kind of like algorithmic.
Right.
Now it's like AI driven, which makes it more capable. So it's the agentic AI, not RPA and
Yeah, the RPA is still the I always say it's not really RPA is not AI at all. It's just a dummy bot. It's basically a macro on steroids, but it's effective if you need it. But yeah, AI is a whole
well,
different.
in the end, you can talk about AI, but it's got a lot of the audit. There's a lot of plumbing and piping and
Right.
algorithms and other things that go around it to like actually use it efficiently and make it work well. So
Yeah, no, and we love it. So we've been using it. I mean, I don't know if anybody really knows this, but when you're getting onboarded here at Armanino, you're talking to an agentic AI bot to help you get through the process. So we're using it ourselves, like eating our own dog food, so to speak, the good Purina quote. But because I agree, that's where this is going, and it's how it's
that's like
changing.
I view like I don't want to have a big I don't want to have a big enterprise sales force. We want to make our stuff easy to use and have AI at the front of it.
Yeah, it makes sense because you can do that now.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah, so instead of hiring people to do that stuff, we're integrating that into the product. We're building out the mobile and the desktop and the web apps to basically be AI first. It's an AI native approach to building a business, which is
How, how do you see this
potentially.
going
I mean, they're
forward?
talking about that there will be a first unicorn with one employee.
That's crazy. I mean, I
Yeah,
love that goal. I love it. I mean, but you're right. That's crazy to think about right now.
I can't do
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
I need a few dozen
Yeah.
But
Do you think we're
so
ever going
it's
to
like that
see?
mentality of being efficient in what you're doing, and there's this whole debate between growth and in other words, like I'm going to implement AI to grow my business,
Right.
or I'm going to implement AI to do my business with fewer people, right? It's like, and the positive thing, it's like, yeah, the jobs may be different, and
Yeah, I mean, couldn't you do both?
most of the people we're talking to want to grow their business and be more efficient. It's not necessarily shrink their workforce, although it's a combination, right?
Yeah,
It's
I think it's a combination because I don't think the clients I interact with, their goal isn't to I want to fire people. That's not the topic we're having. It's more about that productivity and growth
but it's
discussion.
like there's stuff that you're spending a lot of people on right
Right.
now that is not going to take that many people. So then it's
Right.
like, are those the people that are going to go and grow your business in some other way, or maybe it's going to be brutal. It's
Yeah, I do see that coming too. Do you
and
think we're going to get to the level of like ASI and like where we have that superhuman or super AI intelligence that is smarter than all of us? Like that's the
oh,
fear mongering.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, in a lot of ways, look. So let's take Culligan for example.
Okay.
They've got 10,000 documents across 12 product lines. And there's no support engineer that knows all that stuff.
Right. There's no way.
There's
Yeah.
no, that the AI is better,
Right.
right? The AI knows all of it and can answer any question at any moment,
And
24
nearly
hours a day,
instantaneously. Right.
and the person, in other words, it's smarter. It can keep all that in its head. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, our computers have been able to do that, but now it can synthesize it in a much more rational way. I mean, there's like 200-page documents, and you're asking a question, and now the AI will tell you the answer to the question and point you to the page to go and grab them, whatever oh, you need that. Okay, here's what you need to know. I mean,
Right. And that's the future. That's going to be the future speed of business, essentially. Right. We're going to run at the
so it
speed.
is a superpower. I mean, AI is like supercharging our ability to work and to think and consume information. Ultimately, this gets into personal and civic applications. So
Absolutely. How would it
think about
not?
having circuits that are published out on the network that you can follow around topics. Because basically, AI is going to abstract us from the details.
Yeah.
We have to have an AI. We have to have a robot there to help us deal with this deluge of like fragmentation of systems.
Maybe that's what saves us from the horrors of social media in a way, right? So,
That was the origin of circuit. The
that's
question,
fantastic.
the problem is I don't know how to make money on that yet without advertising. And then building that is really hard, right? So Meta and Google are both advertising driven companies. And I don't really want to be, brands will have circuits, but then you're not going to build an ad platform from day one. And so, we're going to go that direction and create a new type of network where you can share
Right.
posts, but it's really put in the context of, all of the knowledge about that topic. And so it's not just a news reader, it's a social network, but um, it's not a network of posts, it's a network of knowledge. So we
Yeah.
call it knowledge
And I
network.
do think that's sorely needed right now. We are inundated, right? There's way too much information, most of it being false. or manipulated? And how do
So
you?
that's ultimately what we're going to build. The same functionality that used for this one-to-many is the same functionality that gets used for them.
That's exciting.
Yeah. And the two more things on this is we're doing product-led growth, which is making things simple. So we don't, basically you start thinking about being viral and you just pick it up and implement it. Most of the big SaaS companies have done that. And an AI SaaS company is different than, or an AI company is different than SaaS. SaaS is like it doesn't cost anything to run.
Yeah.
AI costs money. We're not building all these data centers for free.
Right. Yeah. The
The more
power,
AI you use,
compute power takes a lot of power. Right.
so we're doing consumption-based pricing. So in other words, the more AI you use, the more we charge, and we'll make
which
margin.
makes sense.
Very much like TSMC and semiconductors.
Right.
And then we're not charging per seat, because if you want to build a network, you want everybody.
You want everybody on there, so you pay for the usage. Do you see a constraint coming with, it takes a lot of natural resources to do that too. If you're getting back further down beyond the application layer, getting back into compute power.
Oh yeah, we're gonna. My goal is also to be one of Amazon and all the data centers and LLM's biggest customers.
Yeah, you have to be, right? Because that's how you're
going to make that useful for companies and for people. That then, that is my revenue stream. I mean, ultimately, maybe you do some advertising. We also see a vision where, like, all the paid data, the subscription stuff, we make a margin. So there's a kind of like a subscription, or a revenue off of sales of data sets, and that's a business for a lot of different companies on the business side and on the personal side. So.
Right.
Like every book, you want the AI in it. You want the circuit version of the book. You don't want a Kindle. You have to read the Kindle. Right?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
I'd like to have the knowledge in that book accessible to me, but you have to enforce all the digital rights and all that stuff. That takes time to put together. Right?
Yeah, because then you're getting into once you get into anything that involves IP creation, and you've got royalties and rules, and
you have to have a really good attorney, and
and because those things are murky. Like the entertainment industry is, they've made an industry out of that. So trying to weave through that, and I was in that world for a while. Trying to weave through that is tricky. It's not easy.
But if you think about Amazon, that's where they started. Digital books or books. But then it's like and Apple has that store, but it's like you buy it and then you got to read it. And I've read most of them. I can remember most of them, but I'd like to have that at my fingertips and even combine that with other things and use it with AI. And you can't do that today. So
see, that's exciting, because that changes the way we learn and the pace in which we learn too.
But it's like you can't just do that. It's like if you make a network out of this and you make it to where you can collaborate and share, and it gets combined with other things, it becomes much, much more useful. So it's like, so that's where it's like I can talk all day about the big vision and what's possible with this.
Right.
And it's like I'm a startup and I have $15 million right now, and I've got to thread the needle.
Right.
And I just, our goal is to do that as quick as we can.
And is that your next step here? Like take Culligan and whatever else ones you got? Like,
we've got basically six, beta pilot customers, and we've got our first product out. So it took us really like 7 months to get our first product out. So we've got the app, we've got the back end, we've got everything working. Right. Doesn't mean that there's not a long roadmap of features to get added and bugs to fix and that sort of stuff. But we've now, we're working with the customers and getting in front and getting that feedback and getting those feedback loops. And this is actually a super critical period for us. But so those initial customer contracts, and then it's like, once you get that, then you start, having a repeatable sales motion. And
I mean, I love that, because, here we like to say we like to be the most innovative consulting firm you ever worked with. What that means to me has always been being closer to the edge of the Tyson Tuttles of the world, what you're building, and how do we help amplify that? Maybe how do we get that to our clients that maybe could use it as well? Because that's how you get it out in the market, and that's how we see if it works. And for us, it's adding value.
When we get to the right point, it is when you're doing strategy, one of the most important things is decide what you're not going to do.
Right.
It's like you can't.
That's almost the most critical thing to say.
Like, hey, this is super cool, and then you can get distracted with all that. And you take your eye off the road.
I think that's the number one killer of business is distraction. Right? You get too many things in front of you, and you don't know what to go after.
Yeah. So that's definitely having to put that into practice. There's a lot of whales that we're dragging in, and it's like, nope, that's not going to fit. You got to say no, even if it's a big one.
Right, and even if it's painful for us, because that still may be the right answer, doesn't mean you don't get to it eventually.
It's like you drag in Exxon, and they will sink us, and that's all we'll ever be.
Right.
It'll be the
super critical of that in the beginning. You're like, well, now that's all you do.
So I guess it's probably appropriate to end a podcast with a Texan with an oil
An oil story.